Good evening, friends. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining. Those of you who are following via Facebook, friends from our groups, Kardec Houston, Sunrise, friends from Austin, from Dallas, from San Antonio, East Texas, USA, all over, including Hawaii and Tri-State New York, Brazil, in England. It's a pleasure to have you all with us. Introducing ourselves, I am Fernanda Wanskovsky, representing Kardec Houston and Ask, Austin Study Kardec. Giselle Haddad, representing her group, Sunrise Spiritist of Texas. And our guest tonight is our friend Julio Padovan. Julio, thank you so much for accepting our invitation and being here with us. I know how busy you are. And Julio, Dr. Padovan has a deep knowledge of Spiritism. Professionally, he is an associate professor at the Department of Chemistry at York University and a full-time researcher at Rockefeller University in New York City. And he is particularly interested in studying the solid logical foundation upon which the Spiritist concepts are built, as well as in creating a higher association among those very same concepts. He holds several academic degrees, including a PhD. And in terms of Spiritism, he is a great speaker, has participated in many conferences in the USA, Brazil, including symposiums. He has been a study coordinator at the Spiritist Group of New York for over 10 years. And he has translated many books, including The Psychology of Gratitude, a wonderful book by Divaldo Franco, and Joana de Angelis' Spirit, which is a very hard book to be translated. He also has participated in the translation of several other Spiritist books by Allan Kardec, Joana de Angelis, Emmanuel, André Luiz, and even Herculano Pires. But most important of all, Julio, you are our dear friend. Thank you and welcome. Would you like to say something?
No,
No?
I'm fine. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for coming. We always start with a prayer, so now let's unite our hearts and visualize the image of our Master Jesus. Elevate our thoughts. Thank you, Father, for this opportunity to be here tonight, for to learn your teachings. We thank you for this guidance. Please inspire us and guide us in this meeting. We ask for your light, for your inspiration, especially to our friend who is going to bring the message tonight. And we pray that this message is going to find a home in our hearts so we can practice and spread it, and then fulfilling our purpose. We hope that we're going to have a wonderful meeting of learning and inspiration. Thank you. Stay with us. Okay, so our topic tonight is rational faith. So we're going to start by saying, by talking about rational faith. Allan Kardec, the founder of Spiritism, encouraged us to keep always a rational faith instead of blind faith. And in the book, the wonderful book, Gospel According to Spiritism, he said, love God, but know why you love God. This is chapter 19. Love God, but know why you love God. Believe in his promises, but know well why you trust them. Rationalized faith, when based in facts and logic, leaves no doubts. The person believes because they are certain, and no one can be certain unless they understand. So here is the first question. Since he warned us about blind faith and advised us to know why we believed in God, and the definition of faith is to have a strong belief in God and trust Him, to be convinced of something for which we cannot see or have no proof. This conviction is based on a feeling or something that we find inside of us, um, and believe it. So, how can this expression make sense regarding rational faith, since this is a feeling inside of us? We cannot hear you. Thank you.
I have reset everything here just in case.
Okay, thank you.
Evening, everyone. Before I start addressing the questions, let me make one thing so that we are all on the same level here. What I'm going to convey to you here are not my personal opinions. It's the result of a study of our Master Jesus Christ's examples of life, which we find not only in the Bible, not only there, but also in the Gospel according to Spiritism, but also from uh, the Spirit Emmanuel and many different books. We also find some of this in the Spirit's book, another book of the Spiritist codification, in the book Genesis, the fifth book of the Spiritist codification, and also in the works of Socrates, a little bit in the works of Plato and St. Augustine. So just to give you an idea where I'm getting this information from, which is not just coming from an opinion or a suggestion on my part. When we speak of reason or rational faith, as we should say, so we are asking whether rational faith is not contradicting the very concept of faith. What we want to know is faith. And faith is a very complex topic. And what we need to understand is that there are many different types of faith. And if you can understand Portuguese, because I do not believe this has been translated, or at least not entirely, Divaldo Franco has a wonderful lecture that I recommend for everyone to attend, or actually to watch in this case, which is God, Jesus, and Allan Kardec. And I believe he gave this lecture this year, February this year. God, Jesus, and Kardec. This is the original title translated to English. God, Jesus, and Kardec. And there he very clearly defines, based also on St. Augustine, based also on the Gospel, he defines beautifully the concept of two types of faith. One, which many different individuals, including the great Spinoza, has categorized as the inherent, the natural, the intrinsic faith. We are going to talk about something that is not necessarily that one, which we'll call here the natural faith. So there is a natural faith and there is another type of faith. Let us just quickly go through the natural faith so that we don't get our discussion here today confused with that. Natural faith is something that comes directly from the divine, from the creator, that exists in all of us. Natural faith is the one that we use when we walk into a new building, a mall, for instance, and we implicitly trust that the ceiling is not going to collapse on our heads. Or if we go into an airplane, that we believe the pilot is not going to decide to commit suicide in the middle of the flight and plunge the whole airplane with everyone in it into the ocean, for instance, or into a mountain. Or that when we take a ride uh, in a cab, in a taxi, that we do not have a schizophrenic as our driver. You may find these ridiculous examples, but I'm giving you the examples that Divaldo Franco used exactly. So, and this is actually true. There is always a certain level of trust or confidence in certain actions or certain situations in which we expose ourselves. This level of confidence, this level of trust, is what we call the natural, some individuals call it the inherent or the intrinsic faith. This is that first stage or step of faith. All right. What we want to discuss here today is not this one. We want to discuss today what we do from this point forward, from this point onwards, which in Spiritism we have a tendency to call rational faith. And rational faith is not dogmatic, rational faith is not blocked, it's not complete. Rational faith is based on an implicit level of trust or confidence, and it's not based on proof, but evidence, which is rather different. From this, we are going to develop our faith. So, faith, like free will, like intelligence, is developed. There is no such a thing as a supermarket in the spiritual realm where we can go fetch a certain amount of faith from a shelf and pay for it or just take it. We develop our faith. The faith that goes beyond that natural faith, the faith that we are going to be discussing today, the rational faith, is this part, is this component of our faith that is beyond the very first flame that the Creator gave us, that goes beyond the natural faith. So, as we develop the answers to the other questions, I'm going to give you a few more parameters in this sense. So, I'm not going to tell you everything right away.
Thank you, Julio. So the next one will be this one. The following quote from Allan Kardec is one of the pillars of Spiritism, and it says, "Unshakable faith is only that which can face reason in all human epochs." Unshakable faith is based on reason, concrete facts, logic, and rational faith. A faith that is built upon studies, reflection, and understanding of the divine laws. According to Raul Teixeira, faith is not only a belief, but it's also trust. Where is the dividing line between reason and trust?
When when we begin to look at these things and we start dividing it into too many ideas, we may end up with a certain problem. I think what we need to do is understand the components. So, as I mentioned to you, faith is actually developed. Let me give you a small example of what I mean by that. If we take the dictionary definition of faith, it's the dictionaries, particularly the Oxford Dictionary, English Dictionary, or the Webster English Dictionary, very reputable ones, we are going to see that they both uh, corroborate one another. And they give 2 points when it comes to faith. One that is completely non religious, and it states that faith is a complete trust or confidence in someone or something. And then they provide a second definition for faith that is more religious when they say it's a strong belief in the doctrines or tenets of a religion based on a spiritual conviction rather than proof. So we have these 2 points. This is a composite from, as I said, the Oxford English Dictionary and the Webster Dictionary. Now, there are a few things that I would like to alter from these two definitions because they do not actually work very well with the part that is supposed to be related to the Spiritist doctrine. So I'm going to say that faith, when we want to, if I want to use these two definitions, that faith is trust or confidence in someone or something under a specific set of conditions or set of circumstances. And I'm going to expound on this a little bit more so we can understand also the answers to the next questions.
Thank you.
And the second one is that it's a strong belief in doctrines or tenets based on a spiritual conviction rather than evidence. Again, here I'm going to make a big difference, I will make a distinction, a large distinction between proof and evidence. It's not that I'm against the dictionaries or that I'm against the definitions from the dictionary. I actually like that, these two definitions. It's just that when we want to apply that to Spiritism, we have to use it in our vocabulary and under the conditions that we study in Allan Kardec's doctrine, the Spiritist doctrine. So why am I so concerned with the idea of trust and confidence? And why is it that I removed the idea of complete that was there according to the original definition? Very simple. Because trust or confidence, either one, okay, both actually, both trust and confidence, they are already complete. So I don't have to say it. Think about it this way. It's like honesty. There is no such a thing as a person who's half honest. If you and I go to a restaurant and by the end of our meal, you are about to pay for it, and you as you take your wallet from your bag or your pocket, and if you drop a $5 bill and a $25 bill without noticing it, you are actually going to lose $25. Now imagine that I see it. I'll be the villain in this example, so they don't feel, disrespected. Imagine that I see that the $5 bill and the $20 bill come out of your pocket, and I actually take the $20 bill to myself, and I only return to you the $5 bill. You don't know that you had lost another bill, a $20 bill. All you know is that one that I'm restituting to you. Does it make me 20% honest? 5 out of 25? No, there is no such a thing. I am still dishonest. So honesty, as trust and confidence, are all absolute terms. You either are or you're not. There's no halfway. So this is why I removed the concept of complete. There is another thing that when we think about trust and confidence, that is a little different from honesty. In honesty, you have to be honest. Either you are or you are not. It's a state of your moral evolution. If you are dishonest in one situation, it means that you are dishonest in your character. So honesty is absolute in everything. However, trust and confidence are not. I'm going to give you an example. Being invited to give this lecture tells me that to some degree, the organizers trust that I can give this lecture, that I can expound on this topic. But I am absolutely sure Fernanda knows me for much longer time, that Fernanda would not trust me if she were taking a plane and a flight to some place, and I were the pilot because she knows that I have never been trained to pilot an airplane.
Yes.
So trust and confidence are circumstantial. They depend on the circumstances. I can trust a friend, for instance, with some piece of advice, but I may not trust that individual under another circumstance, like the one I just gave about the airplane. So faith is based on this trust and confidence, which means that faith, not that natural faith I was discussing before, but the faith that is beyond that, the rational faith that begins at that point and moves forward. The rational faith is also circumstantial. It depends on the circumstances. And here it brings us to the second part, the second definition. When we spoke of the more religious or religious related part of the definition of faith, when we say it's a strong belief or in doctrines or tenets based on evidence, not, based on spiritual conviction rather than evidence. This is more towards that natural faith as well. I said evidence, not proof, because anyone who deals with the legal system, barristers, attorneys, prosecutors, district attorneys, judges, even jurors, we have all served. So we understand at least a little bit because judges usually give us a very short crash course on law. We know that it's not about proof, it's about evidence, which is very different. And we have to move away from this word of proof because there are very few things in life, generally speaking, for which we have proof or proofs. What we have is evidence. And the evidence is a piece of information, a datum, a piece of data that leads us to an hypothesis or another, to an idea or another, to one construct psychologically or another. But it does not say this is for sure 100% assurance. There is no such a thing. The
Mm.
more evidence we gather, the more we approach a certain truth for ourselves. So it is with faith. And it is there that we see the difference when we speak, as in the question here, about the rational faith. This unshakable faith requires the study to get more information, to get more data, because in doing so, we gather more evidence and we are more assured of the reasoning that we apply with respect to a particular topic. The very existence of God is one of them. Or that Jesus Christ actually said what he is reported to have said. I wasn't there. I didn't take a time machine, went there, and said, okay, I have proof that he said it. No, we have evidence, which is different. And this is very important for us to distinguish. So we should not mix reason and trust. We should understand that in the reasoning towards faith, we use concepts such as trust and confidence, which are circumstantial.
Very well explained.
Okay, so the next one is, what is the faith that transports mountains? What is Spiritism's take on this specific saying attributed to Jesus?
When our Master Jesus Christ, remember, Jesus was the man, the human being, Christ was the spirit. But here we can use either one because we're speaking of the action that he's reported to have taken of having said those words. That happened when a man had brought his son who was being using the word that is from the gospel, possessed. We know in Spiritism we don't say that word, we say obsessed, which is quite different. in a lot of things, but the gospel, the original word is possessed. So the poor man's son, sorry, poor man's son was being possessed, was being obsessed by a spirit, and he had brought his son to the disciples, and the disciples did not manage to expel that spirit, to to separate the obsessor from the obsessed individual. So the man then brought him to Jesus, and Jesus said, after having separated the spirit from the little boy, the Jesus was asked by one of the disciples why they had not been able to do so. And then Jesus says to them this famous sentence. So he says other things before that, but he ends by saying, if you had your faith the size of a grain of mustard, you would be able to say to that mountain, move yourself from here to there, and it would be done.
Yes.
Did not mean literally. Jesus, being such a highly evolved spirit, would not have said something that would have contradicted the divine laws, the natural laws, because he knew much better than, and he knows much better than all of us here put together, then we cannot do that. What he intended was to use a hyperbole, which is a figure of speech in which one provides an idea in an exaggerated form. Like we say sometimes, I called you 1,000 times. No, you didn't. You call perhaps 10 times if you're really obsessed about it or schizophrenic, but but not 1,000 times. No one calls anybody else 1,000 times. That's a figure of speech. It's a hyperbole. That's the correct term. And we used to indicate that we have done it with some effort, that we have put a lot of effort to carry out the action. The idea was that when you start any action in your day, if you believe, of course, we're speaking of constructive actions, okay? That goes without saying here. But even it works to some degree also for negative ones, all right? A robber, a thief who is very confident will also be very successful if he has this so-called faith that moves mountains, right? But what Jesus wanted to convey was, of course, about constructive situations, meaning that if we believe in ourselves, if we do so before we even start, we gather towards us the assistance of spirits who are like us, like minded, who will then assist us in carrying out that action. And this is why I was so concerned about saying constructive one. The destructive ones, you also attract to yourself spirits who are destructive by nature, at least for now, because even evil is temporary. But what I want to convey is that you sum your forces with those of somebody else, or actually many other individuals or spirits in this case. And it's this combination, this empathic combination, this synergism that allows you to make things that surprises even yourself. The faith that moves or transports mountains. So this is the rational faith. This is not that natural faith, because the natural faith, we all have the same amount. God distributed equally to each and every one of us. And every time God creates another principle of intelligence, another future being, let's put it this way, that also receives that same amount, the same spark of the natural faith. But the one that transports mountains is the one that we can develop ourselves according to our Master Jesus Christ. That is the rational faith. The more we believe in ourselves, the more confidence, not arrogance, not petulance, not defiance, confidence. A confidence that you tell yourself, I know that what I'm doing is constructive. I know that this is positive. This is going to be positive for myself, positive for the community around me. Even if the community around me is just a colleague at work that sits on the next desk, or spouse at home, or children, it doesn't matter. Or even the people that take the same bus or same transportation that I do, doesn't matter. You are confident in the results even before you begin the action that will lead to those results. It is in this sense, whenever we start something, that we should always have a positive thinking about it. Never forget that Spiritism was born out of positivism. Positivism as the enlightened philosophical principle, not just the idea of doing something constructive, but of positivism as a philosophical movement. That same beautiful lecture that I mentioned to you by Divaldo Franco, God, Jesus, and Kardec. Divaldo spends almost 40 minutes. It's a 3.5 hour long lecture. The first 40 minutes, he does a beautiful review of what led to the positive, to the positivism movement in philosophy, and why Kardec later used that for Spiritism itself. It is our faith based on this confidence, these constructive ideas that will move mountains, not literal mountains, but the difficulties in ourselves and the difficulties in our lives.
I was going to mention exactly that because in chapter 19, it explains this metaphor of the mountains being our obstacles. So it's fantastic. I truly recommend this chapter to anybody because it's a lot of light. Gospel according to Spiritism is a manual of life. It should be read every day because it brings a lot of light. So, next question is how did Allan Kardec, a skeptic scientist in the beginning, turned out to have such a strong and unshakable faith, which qualified him to do this important work, which is the codification of Spiritism. And also, they in this very chapter, they say that faith cannot be prescribed or recommended. It's something that you have, like you said before, you have yourself. So he had this unshakable faith, but not in the beginning.
So, yes, faith cannot be transferred. As I said before, since faith has to be developed,
Yes,
it's like homework. No one can do it for you.
exactly.
You have to do it yourself. Now you might say, oh, but if you said homework, I can always pay someone to do it for me. Well, it doesn't work like that. We know that when we talk about Spiritism, there are certain analogies we can go only so far. So it's a homework that we have to do. And then whenever we don't do it, our conscience will accuse us. But to go back to the question itself, there are two answers for it, a short one and a long one. I'm going to start with the short one. Very simply, Kardec could do all that, first of all, because he was not a scientist. Kardec was not a scientist. It's very important that we understand this. And because that gives him even more accolades and respect, or we should at least have even more respect for him, because he was never a scientist. He was never trained as a scientist. He was trained in pedagogy. He was a disciple of Pestalozzi, and the idea there was working with education. So this tells us how brilliant this man was, Allan Kardec, right? Because we see that without a former training, he was able to be quite methodical. Because not discipline, method, systematization is something that we learn, especially in the natural sciences. When you do social sciences, for instance, you learn discipline. Yes, of course, but not necessarily method and systematization. The idea of hypothesizing, testing the hypothesis, that's the right, proper way of saying testing the hypothesis and reformulating your hypothesis based on the data that you acquire. So the reason why Kardec was capable of doing this, perhaps there was a reason. So perhaps there was an importance for him not to have been a scientist, because that allowed him to see it from different perspectives. Because the method that one learns in the natural sciences sometimes can be a little bit constricting. You have a very direct linear logic which you cannot apply to faith. Faith is very, it branches out very quickly. So Kardec was a philosopher, was an educator, was a Latinist. He knew languages like no other. And so when we read Kardec, especially when we read the original, we see the care that he took to write words, terms, according to what was available in the 1850s, of course, of that. We always have to keep that in mind. But he was always very careful to determine certain terms and use them in very special situations. It was that that allowed him to compile the Spiritist doctrine, to systematize, to organize, to categorize it. His reasoned or rational, which we should say, rational faith came because he had a rational mind. And you don't have to have even formal education to have a rational mind. You have to be inquisitive. You have to, as we say, look before leaping, thinking before opening one's mouth. So all of these are attributes of someone or of an individual who's rational. It was by being this rational, this inquisitive, this investigative, that sometimes individuals confuse and think that Kardec was a scientist. He was not. It's not that it's bad to include Kardec as a scientist, it's not that. But I want to convey the idea that he has even an extra merit because he had not received that formal training. And yet he did a stupendous job, a beautiful job. So it was his inquisitive mind that allowed him to be so rational, which means that we don't have to be formally trained to understand the Spiritism. We don't have to have formal education to reach a state or a stage of rational faith.
He had to see it for himself and walk that path of investigating all this, and then he was certain about this to be able to say that unshakable faith phrase. So I
Kardec was very good at buying tomato sauce at the supermarket. I like to use that expression because I always want people to understand that Spiritism is not necessarily an elitist doctrine, that you do not need to have a degree for it. It's very important when you go to the supermarket and you want to buy a bottle, can of tomato sauce, and you go to one supermarket and you look at a particular bottle and you see that can or that container and you see how much tomato sauce it contains and how much it costs, you have an idea how much you're going to be paying per liquid ounce, for instance, or per gram or kilogram, whatever. If you now go to another supermarket, another store, and you have a different bottle, sorry, the same bottle, the same manufacturer, right? But you do the math and you see which one is cheaper. When you do that, you're exercising your intelligence. This idea, which is very simple, and we all do with things we buy on a regular basis, almost every day. This is what we ask in Spiritism. Nobody wants you to know calculus. You don't, I mean, if you know calculus, fine, you can apply it to something else, but you don't need calculus for Spiritism. You don't need to be a scientist. You don't need to have a PhD in this, that, or the other. It is very important. I actually know many individuals who do not have, not even first, the grammar school completed and are amazing Spiritists. And they understand the doctrine and they actually run circles around many individuals, other individuals who have PhD degrees or master's degrees or college degrees at least, who do not apply themselves as much because they are not naturally inquisitive. They have not developed in themselves the idea, the habit of asking questions for themselves, not asking questions in public necessarily in their minds. They just do. Either they copy someone else or they react to things as opposed to acting. In Spiritism, we have this distinction that is very clear. When we react, it's instinctive. We ask individuals in Spiritism to re educate themselves, to move away from reactions towards actions. Actions require us to think before we do something, to look before leaping. And Francisco Cândido Xavier has a wonderful book in the André Luiz collection, Life in the Spiritual Realm, which is called Action and Reaction, which I
Yes.
strongly suggest everyone read because it's amazing. It explains this without going into the phenomena of phenomena, sorry, or the psychology behind it. Just explains to us how instinctive reactions are and how much more reasoned and rational actions tend to be.
Yeah, the whole collection is wonderful. So the next question is: do we know about any passage in Jesus' journey which would exemplify rational faith, such a parable or a case?
Perhaps all of them. I just mentioned the one from a previous question, the one that speaks of the faith that transports mountains. That's one of them. There is another one which a lot of individuals get completely wrong, which is the parable of the talents, when the master of the vineyard had to be absent from the fields for a while. So he brought in his three servants and gave 10 talents to one, five, five talents to another. I think it's five or three, but it doesn't really matter the number exactly. Let's say five for now. I apologize that I don't remember exactly which one, which value. And the last one got one talent and told the three, "Do what you please, do as you please to keep my vineyard um, in good shape." And then the three servants went about their businesses. And then when the master came back home a few days later, the servant that had received 10 talents told the master, "Here's my 10 talents and 10 more that I obtained with my industriousness, with my effort, with my work." The master was pleased. The second servant came in, the one that received 5 talents, said, "Master, here's the 5 talents that you gave me, and here there are 5 talents more that I also obtained with my industriousness, my service, my effort, my work." When the last one came, had received only 1 talent, he restituted the master his 1 talent. He said, "Master, here's the talent that you gave me. I buried it so that I would not lose it." And then the Lord of the vineyard was very angry at the last servant. And a lot of people get sidetracked by money when you look at this parable. This is a parable about faith. The last servant did not have any faith. So he was so afraid of losing that. The master had not said anything about punishment. The master said, "Do as you please to keep the vineyard afloat." The master never said, "If you don't restitute that to me plus a profit, you're going to be punished." There was nothing like that. So it shows our little faith. that we would rather hoard something and hide from thieves or from erosion, from time, from decay, whatever, but we will not invest that to produce possibly, because there is a possibility that we can lose, but to have the possibility of producing goods, of producing something constructive. Goods here are not fortunes. This is where a lot of individuals miss the point. So this is a parable from Jesus speaking of faith. So we can ask ourselves, what are we doing with all the knowledge that we gain from Spiritism? A lot of us read, shove the books back on in the bookshelf, and never apply it. Never apply the concepts that we learn in our daily lives. That is the exact thing the third servant did when he buried the talent. We are burying our talent. Here, the talent is not money, but we can even use the word talent now as talent, as an ability. We have this information from Spiritism. What are we doing with it? These are the Spiritists who, if you allow me, it's an expression, are paving the streets of hell. Hell is paved with Spiritists because these are the ones who went to Spiritist Center, attended lectures, and read, but never applied anything they learned. They are hiding the talent. They have no faith or very little.
Okay. The next question is, Spiritists proudly state that Spiritism does not promote rituals which are not associated with faith but are physical demonstrations. Still, some Spiritists judge others who may not practice the gospel at home or who have not read the books of decodification. Is this not a form of imposing one's beliefs and practices, and therefore a conflicting behavior with rational faith?
Of course, it's an imposition, and an individual who thinks like that is not a spiritist because he or she is breaking the very first thing about Spiritism, which is that Spiritism does not say do this or don't do that. Spiritism states that whatever we do will create a consequence. It's a question of cause and consequence. When we do something constructive, positive, we reap benefits, consequences that are constructive, positive, whether it's in this life or in the next also, okay, or both. Um, when we do something that is negative, destructive, malicious, we will reap negative consequences. Again, either in this life, the next, or even here and later, right? So individuals who believe that do not understand Spiritism at all. They are not Spiritists. They are breaking our most important concept, which is cause and consequence. Everything in Spiritism is there. I have to be very careful with attitudes like that. The gospel at home is a tool, it's a psychological tool that allows us a moment of meditation, let's say within every week or every 2 weeks or every other day, whenever, how often you do it. But it's not important in the sense of being essential. It is best for a person to be helping a neighbor than to be at home doing the gospel at home. We have to remember this. If we have to forego doing the gospel at home, it's possible. God is not going to be mad. Christ is not going to be mad. But what are we using? What are we doing? How are we using our time, which we should be doing the gospel? How are we using that time? Are we helping a neighbor? Are we paying a visit to an elderly person? or to an asylum, even to strangers. Depending on what we are doing, the gospel at home has second, doesn't have first priority, doesn't have absolute priority. So we should see these things not as absolute. When we start seeing the gospel at home as something dogmatic, we are already not even talking about reasoning from that point. So we can't even talk about rational faith. Rational faith is personal because it's non-transferable. We cannot judge others. We can only judge the faith we have so far and the faith we would like to have tomorrow. This is very important. Spiritism is a doctrine that teaches us to look within, inwardly, not outwardly to others, but inwardly, always to ourselves. What I am today, in comparison to what I was yesterday or a decade ago, and what I want to be tomorrow or a decade from today.
Last question. You talked about dogmas, and dogmas being to accept God's decision without question them. What are the limits between rational faith and resignation, acceptance? Sometimes we cannot control what is happening, and we uh, have to accept and move forward. So, what would be the limits here?
Actually, the answer to this question is very short and simple, and is one that very few people actually like to hear. It's our level of commitment, our level of understanding of the doctrine. If you think of Chico Xavier, Francisco Cândido Xavier, a man with very little education, formal education, we think of him, and yet he understood the concepts of our Master Jesus Christ like very few on planet Earth in the whole history of humanity, if you think about it. So the understanding I speak of here is not an elitist, formalist level of education, but how we apply in our daily lives, how much we apply of the little that we are capable of understanding. When we as Spiritists read one book, perhaps not even a book of the codification, when we read one book and we apply what we have learned from that book, even if we don't apply everything that we learned or could have learned from that book, we are doing a much better job than if we had read all the books of the codification and all the books by Divaldo Franco and Francisco Cândido Xavier and all the other individuals and mentors and spirits that have written to us without applying anything that we read from those books. The idea is not quantity, but quality. You get one individual who reads one book and applies a few things, that individual is on a much better path to plenitude, to perfection, than those of us who read a lot and apply nothing. So this reading and application gives us hands-on experience, because in the end, the books give us information, but it's only in our experiencing the world that we are going to solidify what we read from the books. If we read and we do not apply, we do not solidify that knowledge, not the knowledge, that information. We never gain knowledge. We only have information to talk at a party. Oh, I've read this book. Oh, how wonderful. Yeah, I don't know why anyone would say how wonderful if they read but never applied anything. They don't know if whatever they read is feasible, whatever they read is difficult or easy. to have on a regular day. How many times we learn things in Spiritism and then we go back to the office and we see how difficult it is for us to behave the way the books are teaching us to behave, because it requires a renewal, a reformation. It's only when we experience the world, we face the difficulties, we move the mountains, which is an exaggeration uh, related to our difficulties, our imperfections. So only when we do all of this that we gain forbearance, which is the right word in English, not so much resignation, forbearance. And it's this forbearance that some of us have, and we are surprised because we have very little educational level, formal education. But we are applying whatever little we could read from the books, or sometimes even for illiterate individuals, whatever little someone has told them or has read to them. We have to study. Spiritists, we must study, but not study reading books, attending lectures, which is very passive. But once you finish the book or a lecture, next day at the office, try to apply some of the concepts that you heard or that you read about. That is going to give you the forbearance for the difficult moments in life, including the current times that we have today, which would be the next question. It's rational faith being developed by our experiencing the world according to the Spiritist doctrine, to the tenets that we read about or that we hear others teach us about. But if we don't experience them, we don't apply them in practice, we don't make them feasible in our daily lives, we never transform ourselves. There is no forbearance. And then whatever comes our way, no matter how small and insignificant, will make a mountain out of a molehill. Will make a mountain a huge difficulty when we could have easily surpassed it or overcome it.
Very well explained. And the actions are really what will stay here after we depart. So studying and reflecting on the study are they should trigger the actions, but the actions are what will leave here before we go. So thank you very much for the great learning, the great explanations. We're going to close with a prayer, but we want to thank you for sharing your time and your knowledge with us and explaining so well. You are, as a professor, have the ability to really detail and explain step by step, and this helps a lot for us to understand. So would you like to give us your final thoughts?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I hope this was uh, useful to all of you. I always like to convey this idea. Yes, do please do read the books, attend lectures, ask questions. If you attend a spiritist group right now, I know it's not as easy, but when we return to our physical activities, our local activities, you know, try to do it. The idea is not a fanaticism about I have to attend every lecture, I have to read every book. I have no, because it's better for you to do one little thing and apply it in your daily lives, transforming yourself, which gives you quality work, not quantity. Quality work, okay? Because this is what you're going to do. This is what you need to reform, to remold your perispirit and then your essence. And you're going to take this with you to the other lives, to the other reincarnation process, and even to your life in the spiritual realm. If you do not do this, you get a massive amount of knowledge of information, but no knowledge. You don't stitch things together, and you do not bring this light, that you selfishly collect from the books, from the lectures, from conversing, talking to other individuals, you do not bring this light as a beacon to others who were not there at the moment or who could not afford the book that you're reading, and so on and so forth. We have to be beacons of light. In order, for us to be able to do that, we need someone or a book or something to light us, to give us the first flame, and then we can carry that flame to another. So if we don't carry the flame to another, we're being selfish in a way. So read, question, ask, study. This is going to develop your rational faith, and that rational faith is going to give you a forbearance that will allow you to truly move mountains.
It's nice that you talked about this because the perispirit, if we like let's say cure the perispirit or make it better, everything in the future, including uh, those who come from us, will be better. Like our son, grandson, and even ourselves, because we believe in reincarnation, right? So if we make it better, we improve everything that comes after us. So I think it was great that you mentioned that. So thank you very much. We're going to close with a prayer. So let's now reunite our hearts, our minds, visualize the beautiful image of our Master, and thank for this opportunity to be here learning about this and hoping that by living here tonight, we'll be better people, more inspired, more persistent. Thank you for the guidance. We hope that these lessons will find in us a fertile soil and find a home so we can put in practice what we learned here tonight, so we can make progress and contribute to those around us and serve God, which is our purpose here. Thank you for this beautiful evening of light, of knowledge, of learning. And we hope that our friend will continue in this journey, helping others to learn. Thank you so much. So be it. Julio, thank you so much for being with us here.
You're welcome.
I
Thank
hope
you.
that after all this, you can come in person and to be with us in Houston and maybe have a workshop, because you have wonderful material and knowledge to spare and to share with us. So I'm looking forward to having you as a guest with us in our groups. And I speak for me and for Giselle. Giselle, would you like to say something?
No, it was great. Thank you so much. We learned a lot. And as Fernanda said, you have a lot to share with us. So please, if you can,
Yes.
it would be wonderful for you, for us and having you here.
Yes, and we already
My pleasure.
we placed the invitation already here at the rain check, and then when everything opens, you already have the invitation in place. He's a wonderful speaker, and he organizes his slides beautifully, and it's like perfect. So we love having you as for talks and workshops. So thank you so much, Julio. I hope you are in New York, so I hope it's not too hot in the summer. It's pleasant. Here is very hot in Texas. But thank you so much. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank you all.
And
It was
thank you
nice. My
all
pleasure.
that followed us until now in Facebook or wherever you are in the world. There is somebody in Hawaii that is watching us, in Brazil, even in Europe. So thank you all. It has been a pleasure. Good night.
Thank you. Good
Bye.
night. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.